Good afternoon, my beautiful people. I'm Sotadeology. In today's video, we're going to dissect Sotadeology Lecture 9, Consciousness and its Paintings. So now in this video, we're going to look at how information can actually paint reality for us. Now, in the previous video, I made mention of the fact that God created Adam. Then God took out his right rib to form Eve. And the moment they get connected together and they enter each other as husband and wife, they became one. So now when you look at that story, from the beginning, God spoke to himself. He said, let's create man in our image. Now the whole thing starts with information. And then God breathed into the man, he became a man. So you can see that breath, the word that God spoke, they are the real life for the man that God created. And when you look at that, there are three ways by which anything can actually come to being or come to existence. The first one is the one created by God, which is Adam in this case. The one created by the right rib that happens to be the missing piece, which is Eve. And then the one created by copulation. You know what that means? And that means that the one created by God will have God's signature, which is Adam has God's signature in himself to be the ideal man. Then Eve has Adam's signature in herself to be the real counterpart or to be the supporting part of Adam. You can see that connectivity right from the source down to the Eve. And then when the two of them, when they come together as husband and wife, and they now give birth to a child, they both have their own signature right inside that newly born baby. Then when that child grows up, the genetic coding of the child's parent will form the identity of that child. And that child, when it grows to a certain point, it can actually, just by the virtue of learning and by the virtue of interacting with his environment, can actually develop some other characters that will later define advanced personality, advanced identity for him. So basically, that child can actually do some other things that are not, things that he actually inherited from his own parent. So basically, when you look at the whole thing, it's all about information. Information is the reality of the universe. Information is the reality of consciousness. So now when we look at what information itself is, we can see right from the chart that we have energy density. So this is the classical level. When it gets to the quantum level, what we have there is real mass worth. Then when you look at it, energy density causes energy wave curvature right here, but real mass worth causes energy curvature down here. So basically, when you look at real mass worth, then energy density, real mass worth will be more than that of energy density, in the sense that energy density can easily be converted to pure energy, but real mass worth cannot easily be converted to pure energy. And it is because of that difference that we have, and so we can call the real mass worth as the original, just as we have in optics. you have the original object, and then there is another flipped virtual object. So the virtual object is not the same thing as the real object, and that is the difference that we have in the mechanical system of the universe. Even though the momentum is being constrained by the symmetric nature of the universe, then the mechanical system of that expansion is asymmetric by nature. And that is why we could have momentum, even if that momentum is constant. We could have that momentum. So now we know that when we're talking about information, we'll be referring to a transparent convergence, like transparent system against opaque system. So what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is this energy density can be likened to a transparent convergence. Why this real mass words that we have here, and then this real classical mass words can be defined as opaque system. So that is it, because when you look at the state of information, when you say you have 0 or 1, 0 is when the intensity of light is very low, when probably you say there is no light, so you have that dark background, dark background to that light state, which is 1. So there must be a kind of contrast. There must be a kind of contrast to paint, to have something drawn, to have that painting. So it's more or less like you have a canvas. That canvas is nothing until you paint on that canvas. And when you paint on the canvas, then it becomes something of value. It becomes something of value. It becomes something of reality. So now, when we now look at it, we can see that the relationship or the arrangement of that opaque system to transparent system is what gives us momentum. And then depending on how they relate to one another, we can have expanding momentum, then we can have contracting momentum, and then have the static and undulating discovery, the one at the center, which is this vertical line. So from that, we can then get to know that information and the speed at which that information is transmitted, those two things are very essential. So now, how will consciousness now paint reality? How will consciousness paint our reality? Now, it is very simple. When we look at it, we know that we are different persons at every instance of learning. At every instance of interacting with the environment, we become a new person. So what I'm trying to say is that when a child is born into the world, that child will have little activity in terms of consciousness. There will be a time that the child, when the mother is out of sight, the child will cry, because at that point in time, that child doesn't have full consciousness to know that when the mother, to know that out of sight is not out of the world. But the child will grow to a level that she would understand that, and then she will not cry at the mother's absence again. You understand? So basically, because of the what is it called, dimensional structure of the universe, and by the virtue of dimensions, we have constraints to what we know. When you are in a 2D dimension, the the consciousness that you can have will be restricted by that dimension. When you advance to the higher dimension, you have more advanced consciousness, then you have more advanced intelligence. So now when we read, we become a new person. When you interact with your environment, you become a new person. When you have some friends, depending on how you relate together, you become a new person. And that is why they say, show me your friend and I'll tell you who you are. So the society can influence to determine your identity. Now you can see that by human nature, we are not rigid. Human nature is flexible to learn, to update, to advance, to improve. And that is why information is the key, main important thing to our reality. So basically we get our reality based on how we interact with environment, with our peers, with our learning faculties and everything. So that is that. Then from that you can now get to know that, for instance, there is a particular experiment conducted, and then they realize that experiment was conducted on water, and they realized that based on the environment of a river or water, that environment usually determine the crystal formation of the water. The environment often determines the crystal formation of that water. So if the crystal formation is distorted, then the water is unhealthy. And then by all those negative things that might being said in that environment can as well influence the crystal formation of the water. So just as water could be influenced by its environment, so also humans or human beings can be influenced by the environment. So basically, you can see that back in the days, you have some set of people, maybe in their own time, what they were doing, was to walk from one place to another. It's got to a point, you have some other generations, they started using horses to move from one place to another. And then there is another generation using cars to move from one generation to another, one place to another. Then we have another set of generation that can actually fly jet, plane from one place to another. Now, based on what they have learned and the advancement, innovations and technologies they have been able to acquire, they have actually changed their life. And so we have that change in our environment and in our society. You understand? So basically, there were some times that people would not see drawing tattoos as something important, but based on the peer groups and the lifestyle, you can now see that you have some people that their own way of life is to draw tattoo and things like that. So from that we can get to know how consciousness can actually paint reality for us. So that is that. So now, talking about painting, we are going to I want us to use this particular masterpiece. This masterpiece, I love it a lot. This is a Mona Lisa portrait painted by Leonardo da Vinci. Now, there is something about this painting It's a kind of painting that explains that static and undulating field. Having a static and undulating field tells you that there is a kind of momentum even when there is static nature of that field. And then for one to have this kind of painting where the smile of this particular person, where the smile is so lively, the smile is so lively, so inviting, even though the picture is, the static one. Now, if we're to dissect how this painting is being carried out by Leonardo da Vinci, then we will know that Leonardo da Vinci actually got so deep into this painting. It got lost. From all I can see, he got lost into this painting for him to be able to arrive at this masterpiece. So now when you want, it depends on the passion that you have for something. For you to achieve this kind of masterpiece, you need to internalize the consciousness of every detailed information that you can gather as you are looking at the person you are drawing to arrive at this masterpiece. And that is what Leonardo da Vinci did on this particular masterpiece. As he was looking at the person to draw, he was able to capture the whole reality of that person, even to that smile. And when you look at this image, you can see a lot about this particular person. From the smile, you can see that he's a kind of person that has enjoyed good lifestyle, wealth, that has really enjoyed life. And even it doesn't stop right there, because when you look at this hand, as this person clenched the hand to the edge or the handle of that chair, you can get to know that there is a kind of inherent insecurity in the life of this particular person. So only God knows what that insecurity is. But there is something that this person is intrinsically battling with. And that also reflects in this drawing. That also reflects in this painting. So basically, when you internalize details so deep to the extent that you get lost in what you are doing, you will be able to capture the reality and tell the story as it ought to be told. So consciousness can paint reality and paint the true, as in the whole essence of that reality for us. So in the previous video, I have explained how we need to internalize the missing piece, which you can actually see right here. So this is the whole system, and the moment you are able to internalize the missing piece, which in the case of time energy wave model is the positron. It is the positron, but basically it might be that the missing piece in the nucleus of that time energy wave model could serve as positron that attracts the electron of that 3D, such that it gets tagged on that 2D to give us that interconnectivity of 2D to 3D. And at that point we get the full reality of 2D, and then the full reality of 3D will be ascertained when we move to 4D. So that is that. So information is so essential, because once we have information on something, it gives it value. And then from that, we can see that For us to get full reality, we need to get lost. We need to internalize the missing piece, get every detail and all that. Then I want to briefly talk about this Star of David. There is something about this Star of David. I said that this Star of David, when you zoom in on the central line that we have, when you zoom in on this central line of time trajectory, which is the reality of the universe, what you're going to have will now be this Star of David, because the present peregrination of time is the static combination of the future and the past. Now, this Star of David is the symbol on Israel's flag. That is the symbol of Israel's flag. Now, for this Star of David to be symbol of that chosen country, then it must mean something so important. What do I mean by that? There is a point, there is a place where when you read the Bible, that Jacob, when he slept, in his dream he saw angels actually descending from heaven, and that particular, he saw like a ladder, an angel descending from heaven. So he named that place Bethel or so. So basically, when you look at the position of Israel, the location of Israel in the map of the world, Israel is more or less like being at the center. And so there is a place in Israel where there is a portal to heaven, or a portal from heaven to earth. So basically, for that same symbol to be found at the central point of my research of this time energy wave model, then it means that this symbol is so powerful and it's something of huge value. So now I've been thinking about how this symbol could be interpreted. I don't really know how I can interpret it, but what I come up with is that when you look at this symbol, this symbol has compacted equilateral triangles, and when you count the compacted equilateral triangles, which are one, I didn't draw it the way it ought to be drawn. This side shouldn't be this big, they should be of this size. So we have the compacted equilateral triangle. When you count, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You have 6 of that equilateral triangle. Now, equilateral triangle has 60 degrees, and that 60 degree of each angles, when you sum them together, you have 180. When you now sum you have 180 of that. When you sum that 180 times 6, you have 1080. Now, right inside the right inside the Star of David, we have what is known as hexagon. So basically, when you now count the total shapes that we have 7 shapes. And 7, what does that imply? It implies perfection. 7 implies perfection. So we now have 7 shapes. Now the hexagon has 6 sides, and every angle of the hexagon is 120. When you sum that together, 120 times 6, then you have 720. When you subtract 720 from 1080, you have 360. 360 is a circle. 360 is a circle. Now, by having that as a circle, if you are to digitally reduce that, that will be reduced to 9, because 3 plus 6 will give you 9, and 9 is the path to the creator. So when you reduce this whole Star of David, it connects you back to the creator. So the source of this symbol is back to the creator. But basically, when you look at, because of the fact that we have compacted equilateral triangle round this star, then it's possible for us to have the circle. So this can be reduced to circle. You understand? It can be reduced to circle. But now, in our discovery, we know that there is extension to advanced circle. There is extension to another advanced circle, which is 3D. And for us to have that, then this shape will not be circle, it will be something like sphere. And so how can we now describe sphere? So basically, in my poem, there is a poem I wrote before all this discovery. Right in there, I analyze 369, which is the the number, Tesla number. Tesla said that if you want to know the deep secret of the universe, you need to know the meaning of 369. So he said you should think in terms of frequency, energy. You understand? And there is another third one like that. But in my own poem, I said you should think in terms of worth, reality, and reality is what we have discovered at the center of this time energy wave. And then think in terms of worth, reality, and energy. So that is the reality of this. So that 360, if we now put 9 at the back of the 360, we have 369. So that 369 will represent the sphere that we are supposed to have by the extension that we discovered in this. And so it's a powerful number, as Tesla said, indeed. So with that, I believe I have come to the end of this video. I will put link to my research publication in the description below. You can actually click on that to explore this more, and then make sure you don't hesitate to subscribe to this channel so as to be updated for the next upload. Thank you. God bless you.